Whether your company is in growth mode, protecting what they have on hand, or adapting to a new normal, responsible expense management is never far from an executive's mind. This is particularly true during an economic downturn when the cash generated from expense reductions can be invested in growing your competitive advantage or as an alternative to more drastic action. My name is Philip Ideson, and in this special 5-part Art of Procurement series, I'll share with you the strategies and tactics that you can use to responsibly build the expense management program that your organization needs and achieve cost savings that stick. We'll consider how to build an expense management program, pitfalls to avoid, and the 24 different expense reduction tactics that you can use along the way. I'll be bringing my own personal experience from achieving hundreds of millions of dollars of savings as a practitioner and consultant over the last 20 years in a way that always focused on aligning outcomes with stakeholder and with company needs. Today, in part 4 of this 5-part series, I share 9 different category and demand management cost reduction tactics that you can use in your expense reduction wave plan. In part 3 of this special series, we discussed a number of incumbent supplier and sourcing expense reduction tactics. Well, today we're going to focus on demand management, so reducing the volume of products or services that you buy, and category management tactics, which usually take a bigger picture approach across a category of spend to change what, how, and from whom you buy, while still achieving the same or hopefully improved outcomes. So let's go straight into demand management. Here are examples of 4 different tactics that you can use. And the first one is to tighten approval authority levels. So consider increasing your delegation of approval authority levels so that any expenditure requires greater scrutiny. This can be applied to all products and services purchased, or you can just apply it to certain categories. Corporate travel is an example. Similarly, you can reduce purchase limits on corporate credit cards. Neither of these tactics are going to win you any friends, so you do have to roll them out with care, but they can be really effective to kind of increase the compliance if you're having to roll out specific policies and processes around what people can spend and what they can't spend on that may have been different than before. The second tactic from a demand management perspective is to standardize product and service specifications. So as an example, do you give an employee the chance to choose between 10 laptops, or 5 office chairs, or 5 different types of uniform shirts? If you do, think about where you can standardize your product and service specifications so that employees have only 1 or 2 choices. Now, this can be things your employees interact with, but this can be things that go into product or MRO or all kinds of different things where you have a proliferation of different specifications that ultimately they actually achieve the same goal. So you aren't likely to see any difference in performance, but it's going to allow you to consolidate volumes. And there's obviously a lot more benefits throughout the value chain of having standardized product and service specifications. As an example, much bigger scale, but think of Southwest. Southwest Airlines here in the States, they only use a single type of plane. And so that has lots of additional benefits from familiarity, maintenance costs, lots of different ways that having a single spec reduces cost, where having multiple specs really explodes all the different costs associated with servicing those planes. So think about that at your local category or product and service level. The third demand management tactic is to reuse products or services. Now, are you going to reuse a pair of boots? Probably not. But there are many categories of spend where products and services bought elsewhere in the company can actually be reused. And an example that I have seen on a number of occasions is actually in market research and data. So many organizations purchase data that can actually be used by other areas of the business. But the other area of the business, they don't actually know that somebody else, in a different building or a different office or different department is actually buying the very same data. In some cases, it's the very same reports. And that report remains locked up on the hard drive of the individual who actually purchased it. There may also be, and I kind of laugh at this phrase, but cash in your trash. Are you able to resell or recycle products and materials that are no longer necessary? So waste management is a great category to look at here. Or can you do something like rent a office roof to the local electric utility for solar panel installation. There's different things you can do where you can start to get creative. When needs must, you think of really interesting ways to think about how you can reuse products or services or repurpose assets that you have for different purposes. And the last one in demand management is controls to stop duplicate purchases. So we talked a little bit about stakeholders buying products and services in silos, increases the chances that you're buying things that you already have. So your procurement software may actually be able to flag potential duplicate purchases before a PO is placed. And if it doesn't, another effective way to identify those opportunities is to instill some level of governance, which I really think about this as more of a sanity check on potential purchases over a certain financial threshold before final approval. So no, we're not going to get, the ones and twos, the smaller spend items, but some of the bigger projects that we spend money on where there's actually an opportunity to, maybe we're buying something very similar in one part of the business versus another. It could be some consulting services as an example, where there's an opportunity to really bring those purchases together rather than buy them independently. Now, when we think about governance, that could be at the category manager level, or for those companies who are more tightly managing external expenses. And I've seen this a number of times, a cross-functional executive kind of procurement approval board. So that was some demand management tactics. Now we're going to go on to the category specific tactics. And I have 5 different tactics here. The first one is spend and supplier consolidation. So to be honest, this is the go-to foundational strategy that category management was built on. And for good reason, because it generally works. That said, looking at all your supply base and consolidating suppliers is not usually a quick win strategy because you need to align contracts and implementation can be complex. And as Signet CPO and former VP of North America procurement for the Coca-Cola company, Brian Bancroft, who reminded us in a podcast actually on the art of procurement, you might have a global strategy here from a spend and supplier consolidation perspective, but you really have to adapt it to fit each location or region. In his words, in requiring global suppliers, we've set up a lot of people for failure. So definitely a strategy or tactic that you can use here. But it may not be something that generates savings immediately, but something definitely to keep in your toolkit. The next category tactic is adjusting the volume mix across multiple suppliers. So this is something that can be a quick hit opportunity, mostly in a commoditized market where you have a small number of dominant players. And examples where we've had success using this strategy may range from credit reports to automotive lighting. I did it personally as a buyer earlier in my career in the automotive lighting space, where, in that market, you have this position where you have 2, 3 providers, maybe 4 providers, but there's not really a lot of switching costs between them, and the products that they offer are pretty much the same. And you come and look at these, and it's the first time you've looked at them in a little while, and your volume mix really hasn't changed it can be in years. The providers become complacent because you haven't mixed it up, knowing that they can happily push kind of their 3% year-over-year cost increases without really any effect to their business because you just accept those cost increases, or perhaps you have done in the past because we haven't really looked at them in this way before. So now is a great time to shake things up. To really get maximum advantage of this strategy, if you know which SKUs, which individual products, in the lighting case, it was which individual type of light bulbs are more important to which company, because maybe they have a manufacturing line that they need to keep running, or they have new product innovation that they are really motivated to bring to market. If you can understand those on a supplier by supplier basis, you can really use that as leverage for lower pricing on those less desirable, lower volume SKUs. So let's say the only caveats I mentioned before, switching costs must be low. And really importantly, you have to have the authority to make the volume changes that you commit to, because nothing undermines this strategy quicker than committing to make changes and then demonstrating that you don't have the organizational support to do so. And I've actually seen it be more effective as kind of a two-step strategy. The first step is you renegotiate prices and volume switches, and you make some. Now, these may not be the best cost savings that you're going to achieve over the long term, but what you're doing is you're demonstrating to the suppliers that you have the ability to switch volumes. Once you've actually shown that, then the next round of negotiations, you're in a much stronger negotiating position. Now, the third tactic from a category management perspective is substitute products and services. So can you replace what you buy today with an alternative approach and still drive the same or better results? Now, this could be a substitute of a lower quality. An example in corporate travel may be to fly Spirit on your Chicago, New York city pair versus flying JetBlue. It can be a change in delivery method. So communicate with customers using emails and PDFs versus perhaps historically you still sent things through regular mail and through printed documents. Or it can be a completely different approach. One example that I used in the past was replacing paralegals with computers to do initial discovery work in legal matters. Drove significant reductions, far more reduction than you can ever negotiate if you're doing like for like and trying to get 10, 20, 30% reduction. Changing the actual business model, that can drive 70 to 80% savings in some cases. Now, the next tactic is something that I talked about actually all the way back in part 2 when I was discussing the kind of needs assessment from an expense management program perspective. And it's that bottom-up review of critical and non-critical spend. Here it's applied to specific categories. So by performing that bottoms-up review of the spend, you can categorize each supplier and each product or service that you buy as whether it's mission critical, is it something that's nice to have, or is it something that's a little bit of a luxury? So another spend items, when you do that, you can just stop using because some of those purchases may have been in a different era, and that different era may have only been 3 months ago or 6 months ago when priorities were different, and you really just don't need them anymore. Now you can then look and say, what are the areas that are fundamental to our competitive advantage that the risk reward payoff of trying to reduce the expense there isn't worth opening a hornet's nest. Recognize though, when you do this, a lot of stakeholders are going to tell you at the beginning that most of their spend is mission critical because they're not going to want to be seen as spending money on things that aren't important to them. So it definitely requires an empathetic approach. And it's often most effective in a group situation, where you can debate this without prejudice rather than just a one-on-one with the budget owner, where they can become a lot more defensive, but can be a really powerful strategy, one from category perspective, but also from demand management. And then the last tactic is to look at local sourcing to reduce total cost of ownership. Now, this might not be obvious, and local sourcing is going to be front and center, I think, of a lot of procurement strategies just from a risk mitigation perspective. But I want to talk about it just here in the context of total cost of ownership. And I say it may not be obvious because it may actually increase the purchase price versus an offshore, perhaps lower cost supplier. But few things give procurement a bad rep, like not considering the total cost of ownership. So I have 5% cost reduction initiative by bringing in a new supplier, a different location, may actually increase the total cost of ownership by 10% because of all the cost of transportation and travel, and maybe there's different processes and just things that we don't think about as much. So you can use local sourcing to reduce total cost of ownership, where you don't have that much travel, transportation involved. You have an easier communication channel. You can also use it, as I said, to reduce supply chain risk. And something that's important, I think will become even more important right now is in times when organizations are taking help from governments to survive, is that demonstration of a commitment to investing in your local community. So lots of benefits of local sourcing. Just make sure that your math is correct and that you're appropriately communicating the business case for increased product or service costs, because oftentimes the cost might be higher than before, because you may get some pushback before actually presenting real facts that support a total cost of ownership discussion. Okay, I want to thank you for listening to part 4 of this special series, Expense Management, Achieving Cost Savings That Stick. And I'm going to be back tomorrow for the final part 5 of this 5-part series, when I'm going to share some more general tactics that you can use. Thanks for listening to this Art of Procurement special series. For more information and for templates and cheat sheets that you can use to help drive savings that stick, we've created a free-to-access expense management hub that is powered by AOP Mastermind. For more information about the Expense Management Hub, go to artofprocurement.com/expense hub. That's artofprocurement.com/expense hub.